If Adrian Cole ever laughs again, it means the world is ending. That was the first thing Claire Bennett heard on her first morning at Cole Dynamics. Not, "Welcome to the team." Not, "The coffee machine is broken." Just that sentence, whispered by a nervous HR assistant, while 27 floors of Manhattan rain hammered against the glass walls of the building like the city itself was afraid of the man upstairs. Claire honestly thought they were joking. I mean, come on. Nobody goes 12 years without laughing. That sounded medically impossible. But then the elevator doors opened on the executive floor, and suddenly nobody was talking anymore. Men in $6,000 suits straightened their ties. Women carrying tablets lowered their eyes. Even the air felt colder up there. And standing at the end of the hallway, beside a wall of dark glass overlooking Midtown, was Adrian Cole. White dress shirt. Black tie. No jacket. Tall enough to make everyone around him look smaller without trying. His expression didn't just look serious. It looked empty. Like smiling had been removed from him years ago with surgical precision. Claire watched him walk past a group of executives, and not one of them breathed until he disappeared around the corner. "Okay," she whispered. "That's mildly terrifying." Unfortunately for Claire Bennett, terrifying people always seemed to find her. Exactly 11 minutes later, she was carrying 2 archive boxes, a backpack, an iced coffee, and the last surviving piece of dignity she had left when she stepped into the executive elevator alone. She pressed a button for floor 46. The doors started to close. Then a hand appeared between them. The elevator reopened. Adrian Cole stepped inside. Every molecule in Claire's body immediately panicked. "Oh no," she thought. Of course this would happen to me." The doors closed. Silence. Thick, horrible silence. Adrian stood beside her, checking something on his phone while the elevator climbed higher above Manhattan. Claire stared forward, trying not to breathe too loudly. Then the elevator violently jerked. The lights went out. Everything stopped. Complete darkness swallowed the elevator. Claire yelped. One of the archive boxes crashed to the floor. "You have got to be kidding me," she muttered. Emergency lights flickered weakly overhead, bathing the elevator in dim red light. Adrian didn't move. Didn't curse. Didn't react. Somehow that made it worse. Claire pressed the emergency button 3 times. Nothing. "Fantastic," she said nervously. "I trapped the billionaire." Adrian finally spoke, his voice low and calm. "The backup system will restart shortly." That sounded suspiciously like something a rich robot would say before murdering someone. Silence. Claire swallowed hard. "Sorry." Stress joke. Still nothing. The elevator remained frozen between floors while rain streaked against the tiny glass panel near the ceiling. Claire could feel her heartbeat in her throat. "Okay," she said quietly, mostly to herself. "New plan. If we die in here, I just want it officially documented that I never figured out what quinoa actually is." Adrian slowly lifted his eyes from his phone. Claire noticed it immediately. A reaction. Tiny. Almost invisible. So she kept going. "Also, your building smells aggressively expensive. Like cedarwood and unresolved childhood trauma." 1 second passed. Then 2. And for the briefest moment, Adrian Cole's mouth twitched. Not a smile. Not fully. But close enough that Claire froze in shock. Because suddenly she understood why the entire company talked about this man like a ghost. The silence around him wasn't power. It was grief. And somehow, trapped 30 stories above Manhattan with a stranger making stupid jokes in the dark, the coldest millionaire in America had almost remembered how to laugh. The elevator finally jolted back to life with a metallic groan that made Claire nearly spill her iced coffee for the second time in 15 minutes. The fluorescent lights flickered overhead, washing the small space in pale white again, and for a moment neither of them moved. Adrian Cole simply stared ahead as if the last 5 minutes had never happened. As if his mouth had not almost betrayed him with the shadow of a smile. Then the elevator dinged softly at floor 46. The doors slid open. Two executives standing outside immediately straightened when they saw him. One of them looked directly at Claire with pure sympathy, like she had just survived a natural disaster. Adrian stepped out first. Claire adjusted the archive box in her arms and hurried after him, mostly because her knees still felt weak. "Miss Bennet." She froze. Adrian had stopped walking without turning around. The entire hallway went silent again. "Yes?" she answered carefully. He glanced toward the crushed coffee cup still sticking out of the top of her box. "Your sense of humor is highly unprofessional." Claire blinked. "I get that a lot." Another pause. Then he walked away. The executives around them looked stunned. One woman nearly dropped her tablet. Claire frowned in confusion. "What?" she whispered. Nobody answered her. By lunchtime, everyone in the archive department knew about the elevator incident. Claire sat in the break room eating a $6 grocery store sandwich while 3 employees stared at her like she had accidentally fought a bear and survived. "You spoke to him casually?" one asked. "Inside the elevator?" "Technically, I panicked professionally," Claire corrected. "That man has fired people for less." "For less than what?" "Breathing incorrectly near him." Claire laughed, but nobody else did. That was the unsettling part. The fear around Adrian Cole did not feel exaggerated anymore. It felt trained into people over years. Like employees had learned to survive the building by becoming invisible. Claire hated places like that. By 3 o'clock, she was buried in old company files in the underground archive room when her desk phone rang. Nobody used desk phones anymore, which automatically made the call feel threatening. "Archive Division," Claire answered cautiously. "Mr. Cole requests the Jensen acquisition records from 2017. Claire nearly choked on air. "Me personally?" "Immediately." The line disconnected. "Cool," Claire muttered. That sounded healthy and normal. 10 minutes later, she stood outside Adrian's office carrying 2 thick binders against her chest. Floor-to-ceiling windows stretched behind his desk, framing Manhattan in soft gray rain. The office itself looked less like a workspace and more like a museum designed by someone allergic to happiness. Black shelves. Steel accents. No family photos. No personal items. Nothing warm. Adrian sat reading financial reports without looking up. "You requested these?" Claire asked. "Leave them there." She walked toward his desk carefully, then paused when she noticed something strange near the corner of the room. A tiny flashlight sitting beside the couch. Her flashlight. The one she had dropped in the elevator earlier. Adrian noticed where she was looking. "You forgot it." Claire smiled faintly. "Most billionaires would have security burn it for contamination." Adrian continued reading. "You make many assumptions about billionaires. Only the emotionally terrifying ones." For one dangerous second, silence filled the office again. Claire immediately regretted speaking. But then Adrian leaned back slightly in his chair, studying her with an unreadable expression. "You are unusually comfortable speaking your thoughts." "No," Claire admitted honestly. "I am actually uncomfortable constantly. I just talk through it." To her shock, the corner of his mouth moved again. Tiny. Almost invisible. But real. And somehow that small reaction felt bigger than the skyline behind him. 3 weeks later, people at Cole Dynamics had developed a strange new office habit. Whenever Claire Bennet walked into a room, conversation stopped for half a second because everyone secretly wondered the same thing. What exactly is happening between her and Adrian Cole? Claire wished she knew the answer too. It started small. Too small to notice at first. Another unexpected phone call from the executive floor. Another request for archived files that absolutely could have been emailed instead. Another silent 5-minute interaction where Adrian barely spoke while Claire nervously filled the room with awkward commentary about overpriced salads and why office printers always sounded emotionally exhausted. Somehow, those moments kept happening. Every Tuesday around 4 o'clock, Adrian requested old acquisition records. Every Thursday morning, he asked for compliance folders personally delivered to his office. Claire eventually realized something important. He already had digital access to all of them. You think he likes her? One employee whispered near the coffee station. No, another replied immediately. I think she confuses him. Honestly, that felt more accurate. Because Adrian never flirted. Never smiled openly. Never acted warmer. But whenever Claire entered a room, something in his expression shifted slightly, like a man hearing music from very far away. One rainy afternoon, Claire arrived on the executive floor carrying a stack of binders balanced against her hip. She nearly tripped over a small cardboard box sitting near the reception desk. A soft meow came from inside. Claire blinked in surprise. You have got to be kidding me. She knelt down carefully and opened the box. Inside sat a tiny orange kitten wrapped in a company sweatshirt. Who leaves a cat in a billion-dollar office building? She whispered. The receptionist sighed. Maintenance found him in the parking garage this morning. Nobody knows what to do with him. Claire immediately scooped the kitten into her arms. Congratulations, she told the cat seriously. You are now employed. The kitten purred against her chest. Unfortunately, that was the exact moment Adrian walked out of his office. The entire floor went still. Claire slowly looked up while holding the tiny orange cat like a criminal holding evidence. This is not what it looks like, she said. Adrian stared at her. Then at the kitten. Then back at her. There is a cat in my executive hallway. Technically, Claire corrected gently. There is emotional support leadership in your executive hallway. One horrified assistant physically covered her mouth. Claire waited for security to appear. Or termination papers. Or maybe lightning from the ceiling. Instead, Adrian stepped closer toward the kitten. The tiny cat reached one paw toward his sleeve. And for one brief moment, something happened that nobody on that floor had ever seen before. Adrian Cole looked soft. Not happy exactly. Not healed. Just less guarded. Like a crack appearing in thick ice. Does he have a name? Adrian asked quietly. Claire looked stunned. I was thinking Gregory. That is a terrible name for a cat. Wow, Claire gasped dramatically. So the billionaire does experience emotion. Adrian exhaled slowly through his nose. It almost sounded like he was trying not to laugh again. Almost. Then his gaze shifted toward the rain outside the windows. Manhattan blurred gray against the glass while the office lights reflected softly across his face. Claire noticed it then. The exhaustion in him. Not physical exhaustion. The kind that lives deeper. Like this man had been carrying silence alone for so long that he no longer remembered how to put it down. The kitten curled against Claire's sweater, purring loudly. Adrian watched the sound more than the animal itself. You should take him home, he said finally. Claire smiled faintly. See? Deep down, you are basically one emotional support cardigan away from being nice. Adrian looked at her for a long second. Miss Bennett. Yes? Nobody has ever spoken to me this way before. Claire adjusted the kitten in her arms carefully. That sounds lonely. The room became completely silent again. But this time, it did not feel cold. After the kitten incident, something subtle began changing inside Cold Dynamics. Nobody said it out loud at first because nobody wanted to sound insane, but the entire executive floor felt different whenever Claire Bennett was around. The tension softened slightly. Assistants breathed easier. Meetings ended with fewer people looking like they needed therapy afterward. It was not dramatic. It was tiny. Human. And somehow that made it stranger. Claire noticed it most during late evenings. Adrian stayed at the office long after everyone else left, sometimes until midnight, the glow from his office windows still burning over Manhattan, while rain or snow blurred the skyline outside. Claire only knew because she often stayed late organizing archive records with Gregory the orange kitten sleeping inside her oversized desk drawer like a tiny criminal. One Thursday night, she carried a stack of old legal binders toward the executive elevator when she noticed something unusual. Floor 46 was dark. completely dark except for one narrow strip of light near the far hallway. Curiosity got the better of her. She followed the light quietly past empty offices and silent conference rooms until she stopped near a black security door she had never seen open before. The number beside it read simply, 46A. No department name. No office label. Just a locked floor hidden behind the executive wing. Claire frowned slightly. That does not look mysterious at all, she whispered to herself. Before she could stop herself, she pressed her ear lightly against the door. Silence. But then she noticed something through the narrow glass panel beside it. Dust-covered desks. Covered furniture. Old computer monitors frozen in time. It looked less like an office and more like someone had abandoned an entire piece of the building overnight and never returned. You are not supposed to be here. Claire nearly jumped out of her skin. Adrian stood behind her holding 2 coffee cups. He looked exhausted. Tie loosened. Sleeves rolled slightly past his wrists. For the first time since meeting him, he looked less like a billionaire and more like a man who had forgotten to sleep. Claire awkwardly pointed at the door. I was just professionally snooping. Adrian stared at the dark floor beyond the glass. Something distant moved across his expression. That level has been closed for 12 years. Why? The question escaped before Claire could stop it. Adrian did not answer immediately. He handed her one of the coffee cups instead. Hot chocolate. Not coffee. Claire blinked in surprise. You remembered I hate coffee after 6 because it tastes like battery acid to me. You say many things repeatedly. Adrian replied quietly. Claire wrapped her hands around the warm cup while Gregory peeked sleepily from her tote bag. For a while neither of them spoke. The city lights shimmered through the windows around them while the old hidden floor remained dark behind the glass door. Finally Adrian said softly, My sister worked there. Claire looked up slowly. Oh. She ran community outreach before the company became public. His voice stayed calm, but something underneath it felt fragile. After she died, I closed the floor permanently. The hallway became painfully quiet. Claire suddenly understood everything people whispered about Adrian Cole. The coldness. The silence. The way grief seemed to follow him into every room like a shadow nobody else could see. He had not frozen because he lacked feelings. He had frozen because feeling anything hurt too much. Adrian looked toward the locked floor again. People assume time fixes loss, he said quietly. It does not. It just teaches you how to carry it without collapsing in public. Claire swallowed hard around the sudden ache in her chest. Then, carefully, she nudged her shoulder lightly against his arm. For what it is worth, she said softly, I do not think your sister would have wanted an entire floor of Manhattan real estate emotionally haunting you forever. Adrian stared at her in complete silence. Then Gregory suddenly crawled halfway out of the tote bag and sneezed directly toward Adrian's expensive coat. Claire gasped. Oh my God! Gregory just assaulted a billionaire. And there it was again. That tiny crack in the ice. Small. Brief. But real enough that Claire saw it clearly this time. Adrian looked down at the kitten, then at her, and for the first time in 12 years, the sadness in his eyes no longer looked completely alone. The first person who noticed Adrian Cole changing was not a board member or an executive assistant. It was the security guard downstairs who had worked in the building for 9 years. Mr. Cole said good morning to me today, he whispered to another guard like he had witnessed a solar eclipse indoors. And honestly, he was not wrong. Tiny changes started appearing everywhere. Adrian no longer stormed through meetings like every conversation personally offended him. Employees stopped flinching when his office doors opened. One analyst nearly cried after Adrian calmly corrected a spreadsheet instead of humiliating him in front of the board. Nobody understood what was happening. Claire did. Or at least she thought she did. Grief had not disappeared from Adrian. It still lived inside him quietly, like winter trapped beneath ice. But now there were cracks in it. Small places where light could finally reach him again. Unfortunately, Healing someone emotionally turned out to be exhausting work when the person being healed had the emotional communication skills of a haunted marble statue. Especially because Adrian had developed a new habit: calling Claire upstairs for absolutely ridiculous reasons. "Miss Bennett, I need the revised vendor archive." "Miss Bennett, locate the original compliance records." "Miss Bennett, Gregory somehow escaped into the executive hallway again." That last one was technically fair. Gregory had become unofficially beloved by half the building after Claire smuggled him into work daily inside her oversized tote bag. The kitten especially liked Adrian's office for reasons nobody understood. One Friday night near 11:30, Claire was reorganizing files alone while rain battered the city outside. Most employees had gone home hours ago. Gregory slept beside her keyboard wrapped in a tiny company scarf someone from accounting had knitted for him. Claire yawned and stretched her shoulders when she suddenly noticed movement through the glass wall of Adrian's office upstairs. The lights were still on. Again. She frowned slightly. Something felt wrong. Usually Adrian worked late in sharp, controlled silence. But tonight he looked restless. He paced once across the office. Then again. He loosened his tie harshly before bracing both hands against his desk like he was trying to steady himself. Claire's stomach tightened. Without really thinking about it, she grabbed 2 instant ramen cups from the break room vending machine and headed upstairs. When she reached his office door, she hesitated briefly before knocking softly. No response. She pushed the door open carefully. Adrian stood near the windows facing Manhattan, breathing unevenly. His expression looked distant and strained at the same time. The city lights reflected across the glass around him while thunder rolled somewhere far below. Claire immediately recognized the look. Anxiety. Not the loud, dramatic kind. The dangerous, quiet kind people hide until they break privately. "Hey," she said gently. Adrian turned slightly, clearly startled she was there. "You should have gone home hours ago. You say that like you are not currently haunting your own office at midnight." He looked away without answering. Claire walked over slowly and placed the ramen cups on the coffee table. "Chicken flavor," she announced. "The official cuisine of emotionally overwhelmed adults." Adrian stared at the cups in confusion. "You brought me noodles." "I panicked under pressure." Silence filled the office again, but not the cold kind anymore. Claire carefully sat on the couch and began preparing one of the cups with water from the office machine. "You do not have to explain whatever is happening," she said softly. "But you also do not have to stand alone in a skyscraper pretending you are fine." Adrian remained motionless near the windows for several long seconds. Then finally, slowly, he crossed the room and sat across from her. Claire handed him the second ramen cup. He looked down at it like nobody had handed him something simple and caring in a very long time. Thunder echoed softly outside while steam curled upward between them. "My sister used to force me to eat when I worked late," Adrian admitted quietly. Claire looked up. His voice sounded different tonight. Less guarded. More tired. "She said billionaires cannot run on caffeine and emotional repression forever." Claire smiled faintly. "Smart woman." Adrian stared into the ramen cup silently before speaking again. "The night she died, we argued." The words landed heavily between them. "I was supposed to call her back." Claire did not interrupt. "Instead, I stayed in a meeting because I thought work mattered more." His jaw tightened slightly. "I never heard her voice again." The city outside blurred beneath rain, while the office remained painfully still. Claire felt her chest ache for him. Not because he was rich. Not because he was powerful. But because suddenly he looked heartbreakingly human. After a long silence, Claire reached over carefully and nudged the plastic fork toward him. "Eat your noodles before your emotional backstory makes them soggy." Adrian looked at her for one stunned second. Then suddenly, quietly, unexpectedly, he laughed. Real laughter. Soft. Brief. But undeniably real. And somewhere deep inside the empty skyscraper above Manhattan, something broken finally began breathing again. The first time Adrian Cole laughed in front of other people, an assistant from accounting accidentally dropped an entire tray of printed reports. Not because the reports were important. Because she heard it happen through the conference room doors and physically lost control of her hands. It was a Tuesday morning strategy meeting with 6 executives, 3 investors, and enough tension in the room to qualify as a weather condition. Claire had only been there because Adrian specifically requested archive support for historical projections, which immediately caused 37 rumors by lunchtime. She sat quietly near the corner of the room reviewing folders while executives argued over numbers projected across massive digital screens. Adrian looked composed as always, but Claire had started recognizing the difference between his calm and his exhaustion. Today was exhaustion. She could see it in the way his fingers pressed too tightly against his pen. One investor kept pushing aggressively about restructuring employee benefits to improve quarterly margins. The market rewards efficiency, the man insisted coldly. Sentiment does not matter. Claire saw Adrian's jaw tighten almost invisibly. 6 months ago, he probably would have agreed without hesitation. But before he could answer, Gregory the orange kitten suddenly escaped from Claire's tote bag and launched himself directly onto the conference table like a tiny furry missile. Papers scattered everywhere. One executive gasped in horror. Another man actually stood up. Gregory marched straight across a financial report before sitting proudly beside Adrian's laptop. Claire covered her face instantly. "Oh my God!" Silence filled the room. Complete stunned silence. Then Gregory pawed at one of the investor's gold cufflinks, and somehow knocked his water glass sideways. Claire immediately scrambled forward. "I am so sorry. He has absolutely no respect for capitalism." One of the younger analysts snorted unexpectedly. Then another person laughed quietly. Claire looked mortified while trying to gather papers from the table. "This is it," she muttered dramatically. "I survived student loans just to get taken out by a tiny orange cat." And then it happened. Adrian laughed. Not softly this time. Not hidden. Real laughter. Warm enough to completely transform his face for a few impossible seconds. The entire room froze in collective shock. Claire slowly looked up at him from the floor while still holding a stack of scattered reports against her chest. Adrian immediately seemed to realize what he had done because the laughter faded almost as quickly as it appeared. But it was too late. Everyone saw it. Everyone. One executive actually blinked twice like his brain needed confirmation. Another stared at Claire with open disbelief. Gregory meowed proudly from the middle of the table like he personally deserved credit for the miracle. Adrian leaned back slightly in his chair, rubbing one hand across his mouth as if trying unsuccessfully to hide the remaining trace of amusement. His eyes shifted toward Claire. And for the first time since meeting him, she saw something there beyond grief. Light. Small. Fragile. But undeniably alive. The meeting ended 20 minutes early because nobody could concentrate afterward. By noon, the story had spread through every department in the building. Security guards whispered about it downstairs. Assistants repeated it in elevators. Somebody from legal apparently called their spouse just to describe Adrian Cole smiling in public. Claire tried ignoring the attention, but people kept staring at her differently now. Less like she was weird. More like she had somehow done the impossible. Unfortunately, not everyone looked happy about it. Late that afternoon, Claire stepped out of the elevator carrying Gregory and immediately stopped when she overheard voices from the executive conference room nearby. "She is becoming a distraction," one board member said sharply. "Adrian has changed too much in a matter of weeks." Another voice answered colder. "People are emotional around her. That makes leadership weaker." Claire felt her stomach tighten. She quietly backed away before they noticed her standing there. But the words stayed with her all evening. Because for the first time since meeting Adrian, she realized something dangerous. The happier he became, the more uncomfortable powerful people around him seemed. The scandal began on a Monday morning with a headline nobody in the building could stop staring at. "Young employee secretly influencing billionaire CEO behind closed doors." Claire saw it flash across someone's phone screen near the elevators before she even reached her desk. Her stomach dropped instantly. By the time she opened the article herself, 3 more websites had already reposted it with even uglier headlines. Anonymous insider sources. Rumors about favoritism. Suggestions that Claire had manipulated Adrian emotionally to gain influence inside the company. One article even used a blurry photo of her carrying Gregory into the building beside the words, "The assistant who changed the billionaire." Claire felt physically sick. "This cannot be real," she whispered. Around her, conversation stopped whenever she looked up. Some employees seemed sympathetic. Others looked fascinated. A few looked judgmental in the quiet, uncomfortable way people do when gossip suddenly becomes entertainment. Her phone buzzed repeatedly with unknown numbers and messages from reporters. Claire immediately turned it off. 20 minutes later, Human Resources requested her presence upstairs. The walk to the executive floor felt unbearable. Every elevator ding sounded louder than normal. Every glance felt heavier. By the time she entered the conference room, 3 HR representatives and 2 board members were already waiting. Adrian was not there. That hurt more than she expected. One board member folded his hands calmly. "Miss Bennett, given the public nature of these allegations, we believe it would be best if you took temporary leave from the company." Claire stared at him in disbelief. "You think I leaked stories about myself online? The issue is perception." "No," Claire said quietly. "The issue is cowardice." The room went cold instantly. Another executive cleared his throat. "You must understand how this appears." Claire laughed once softly, but there was no humor in it. "I brought the man ramen noodles and accidentally introduced him to a cat." Nobody answered. Because deep down, they all knew the truth. The real problem was not that Adrian trusted Claire. The problem was that he had started feeling human again, and people who benefited from his emotional isolation hated it. Claire signed the temporary leave paperwork with shaking hands. Then she quietly cleaned out her desk while Gregory slept unaware inside his tiny blanket nest. The entire office watched her pack. Nobody stopped her. Around 6 o'clock, she carried the last archive box toward the elevators when she heard footsteps behind her. "Adrian." Claire froze but did not turn around immediately. He looked furious in a way she had never seen before. Not cold. Not controlled. Angry. "You are leaving." It was not a question. Claire swallowed hard. "Apparently I am a dangerous emotional mastermind now." Adrian stepped closer. "I did not authorize this." "But you did not stop it either." Silence hit between them sharply. Claire finally faced him. For the first time since meeting Adrian Cole, she looked genuinely hurt. "Do you know what the worst part is?" she asked softly. Adrian said nothing. "I never cared that you were rich." Her voice trembled slightly despite her effort to stay calm. "I cared that underneath all the grief and all the walls, you were still kind." Adrian's expression cracked almost painfully. Claire looked down briefly before continuing. "But the second things became difficult, you let them turn me into a problem that needed to disappear." "Claire, no." She shook her head gently. "You only liked me when I made your loneliness quieter." The words landed like shattered glass in the silence between them. Adrian looked like he wanted to say something. Maybe 100 things. But grief had taught him silence for too long. And silence, at the worst possible moment, can sound exactly like betrayal. Claire adjusted Gregory carefully in her arms. "Take care of yourself, Adrian." Then she walked into the elevator before he could stop her. The doors slowly closed between them while rain hammered against the windows behind him. Adrian stood completely motionless in the empty hallway long after the elevator disappeared. Because for the first time in 12 years, losing someone felt unbearable again. And this time, he knew it was his fault. For 3 days after Claire left, Adrian Cole barely spoke to anyone. The warmth that had slowly begun returning to the building vanished almost overnight. Meetings became cold again. Hallways fell silent whenever he passed. Employees lowered their eyes instinctively like the brief illusion of humanity inside Cold Dynamics had been violently erased. But this time, something was different. Adrian was not numb anymore. He was angry. And anger, unlike grief, moves. On the fourth night, long after the executive floor emptied, Adrian sat alone inside his office staring at the security logs from the week the scandal broke. Rain streaked heavily across Manhattan outside while Gregory slept curled beside the keyboard, occasionally twitching in dreams. Adrian replayed the footage again. Then again. Something bothered him. Claire's personnel file had been accessed from inside the executive network 2 days before the articles leaked online. Not by Claire. By a board member's assistant. Adrian's jaw tightened sharply. 30 minutes later, he was standing inside the private board archive room reviewing internal communication records personally. One email stopped him cold. If Cole continues changing course emotionally, shareholder confidence will suffer. The Bennett situation may provide necessary correction. Adrian read the sentence twice. Then a third time. His expression darkened with a fury so controlled it became terrifying. They had done this intentionally. Not because Claire harmed the company. Because she made him human again. The next morning, the annual shareholder summit filled the largest conference hall in the building. Investors, executives, reporters, and media cameras packed the room while giant digital screens displayed the Cole Dynamics logo behind the stage. Everyone expected Adrian to address the recent scandal carefully and professionally. Instead, he walked onto the stage carrying Gregory the orange kitten in one arm. The entire room erupted into confused whispers instantly. Adrian placed Gregory gently onto the presentation table before adjusting the microphone calmly. "Good morning," he said evenly. Absolute silence followed. Adrian rarely spoke publicly unless necessary. Today, something in his voice sounded different. Colder. Clearer. More alive. One board member shifted nervously in his seat. Adrian pressed a button on the remote in his hand. The giant screens behind him lit up instantly with internal emails, timestamps, access logs, and communication records connecting multiple executives to the media leaks targeting Claire Bennett. Audible gasps spread across the room. Reporters immediately started typing furiously. One investor stood up halfway in shock. Adrian did not raise his voice once. Somehow that made the moment more powerful. "For weeks," he said calmly, "an employee of this company was publicly humiliated for crimes she did not commit." Another screen appeared showing the exact executive accounts responsible for leaking private information to tabloids. "Not because she endangered this company." Adrian's gaze swept slowly across the board members sitting frozen near the front row. "But because kindness inside this building became inconvenient for people who profit from fear." Nobody moved. Nobody even breathed loudly. Adrian stepped away from the podium slightly. "For 12 years," he continued quietly, "I believed leadership required emotional distance. I believed grief made me stronger if I buried it deeply enough." Gregory meowed softly beside the microphone. The sound echoed unexpectedly through the silent room. And then, to everyone's complete shock, Adrian smiled faintly. Real. Gentle. Human. Then a woman carrying instant noodles and a stolen office cat accidentally reminded me that being unreachable is not the same thing as being respected. Soft laughter spread carefully through the audience. Even reporters smiled. Adrian looked toward the crowd thoughtfully before continuing. "Several months ago, Claire Bennett trapped herself in an elevator with me during a power outage." His eyes softened slightly at the memory. "She told me wealthy people were terrifyingly bad at relaxing." More laughter this time. Warmer. Bigger. Adrian laughed quietly too. Openly. Freely. The sound rolled across the enormous conference hall like sunlight breaking through years of storm clouds. Some employees in the back actually looked emotional watching it happen. Adrian turned serious again moments later. "Claire Bennett is innocent. Effective immediately, every executive involved in the leak investigation is terminated." Chaos exploded across the room instantly. Questions. Cameras. Shouting. But Adrian ignored all of it. Because for the first time in 12 years, there was only one person he wanted to find. And this time, he refused to lose her in silence. 1 year later, The atmosphere inside Cold Dynamics no longer felt like a building people survived. It felt like a building people lived in. Music played quietly in the employee cafe every Friday afternoon now. The break rooms actually had comfortable chairs instead of furniture that looked emotionally tax-deductible. Executives learned employees' names. Managers stopped treating exhaustion like a personality trait. And somehow, impossibly, the man responsible for most of those changes had once been known as the coldest billionaire in Manhattan. Claire still laughed every time she thought about it. You know, your company used to feel like a luxury submarine designed by sad robots, she told Adrian one morning while standing beside him near the executive elevators. Adrian glanced down at her calmly. That is surprisingly specific. Because I stand by it. The corner of his mouth lifted instantly now. Not forced. Not rare. Natural. That was the part that still stunned people the most. Adrian Cole smiled easily these days. Sometimes he even laughed openly during meetings, which continued terrifying long-term employees because their brains still needed time to emotionally process it. Gregory the Orange Cat had become unofficial company royalty and spent most afternoons sleeping in random executive offices like he personally owned stock options. But the biggest change waited behind the restored doors of floor 46. Claire stood quietly beside Adrian as the elevator opened onto the once-abandoned level for the first time in 12 years. Sunlight streamed through enormous windows overlooking Manhattan while newly renovated offices glowed warmly beneath soft, golden lighting. Plants lined the hallways. Comfortable seating areas replaced cold, empty spaces. On the glass wall near the entrance, silver lettering reflected against the city skyline. The Evelyn Cole Foundation for Employee Mental Health and Family Support. Claire stared at it silently. You reopened the floor, she whispered. Adrian looked around slowly, emotion moving softly across his face. She spent her life trying to help people feel less alone. His voice lowered slightly. Closing this place never honored her. It only honored my grief. Claire felt tears sting unexpectedly behind her eyes. Adrian turned toward her then, his expression quieter than she had ever seen it. You were right. Claire blinked. About what? That my sister would not have wanted me haunting a building forever. Claire laughed softly through the emotion in her chest. Wow. Do you realize how rare billionaire apologies are? Adrian stepped closer. Claire. Something in his voice made her heart tighten gently. For a moment neither of them spoke while sunlight spilled across the restored floor around them. The city buzzed far below, alive and loud and imperfect. Adrian looked at her with the same expression he once reserved only for memories. But now there was no grief in it. Only gratitude. You walked into my life carrying broken flashlights, instant noodles, and terrible jokes, he said quietly. Claire smiled. I brought emotional support chaos. You brought me back. Her eyes filled instantly. Adrian reached into his coat pocket and pulled out something small. A faded sticky note. Claire gasped softly when she recognized it immediately. One of the first notes she ever left accidentally attached to a file months ago. A tiny hand-drawn smiley face beside the words. Please do not become a villain before lunch. Adrian held it carefully between his fingers. I kept this. Claire covered her mouth, overwhelmed. That is either incredibly sweet or deeply concerning. Adrian laughed warmly under his breath before gently tucking the note back into his pocket. Then he looked at her fully. Openly. Fearlessly. For 12 years, he said softly, I thought surviving pain meant shutting the world out. His eyes never left hers. Then you walked into an elevator and talked to me like I was still human. Claire felt tears slide down her cheeks despite smiling. Adrian lifted one hand carefully against her face, gentle like he still could not believe she was real. Behind them, sunlight flooded the restored floor where grief had once lived untouched for over a decade. And somewhere beyond the windows, Manhattan carried on loudly beneath the morning sky while Adrian Cole laughed again. Not because the pain disappeared. Not because the past stopped hurting. But because love finally gave him permission to live beyond it.